While the F5 tornado of April 9, 1947, is far better remembered for dealing a crushing blow to Woodward, Oklahoma, the same supercell thunderstorm produced another likely family of tornadoes beginning in the Texas Panhandle. The same storm struck Glazier, Texas, and then Higgins, Texas, following Highway US 60, later splitting the difference between several other small towns in northwest Oklahoma. Regardless, fatalities and total destruction of farms and rural homesteads occurred all along the tornado's path before it produced its worst damage and the most fatalities later in Woodward, Oklahoma. This tornado easily floats to the top of the list of worst tornadoes in U.S. history. But Woodward was, and still is, a much bigger city that thrives to this day. Glazier, Texas, the original one at least, was annihilated and never rebuilt. It is said that the only surviving structure was the jail, and it still stands there now, a curious concrete box by the side of a major highway. Today, an unincorporated village of a dozen or so homes takes the place of the original Glazier site. If you and every one of your neighbors lost everything in an instant, the question changes from how soon can I rebuild and becomes should I bother? Building a new home takes months. Worse if everyone is splitting the time of the handful of contractors in the area. How long do you have to wait for your place of employment to rebuild so that you can work and pay bills? The same question is shared by all the folks in your town. Should we? Becomes an important question that each person has to answer. Not just one homeowner, not just a neighborhood, but some plurality of what was once an entire functioning city must answer that question. Should we stay?
Now, Greensburg isn't a ghost town, but it does have a lot in common with ghost towns. For one, it was completely destroyed, and of course it still bears plenty of the scars from all of that tornado damage.
Early in the day on May 4, 2007, a deep trough was digging in across the Rocky Mountains and spilling over Tornado Alley above a moist air mass and southeasterly winds. A classic tornado-evident event was unfolding for western Kansas. The Storm Prediction Center was already predicting severe weather 5 days beforehand. The certainty of severe weather began to increase over those 5 days, and by May 3rd, it had become clear tornadoes were going to be a major concern across western Kansas the following day. By the morning of May 4th, the wording became even more ominous. Tornadoes that form today are going to be destructive. They were correct. To make things worse, this was an early evening tornado event, which means Kansas residents would quite literally be in the dark if a threat was coming, relying on TV radar screens, live weather updates from TV news stations, and storm chaser reports. Around 9 p.m. Central Time, a fierce supercell had formed near the Oklahoma and Kansas state line just south of Kiowa County, and did so in extremely favorable atmospheric conditions, conducive for tornadoes. The storm strengthened and moved north, and quickly began producing smaller tornadoes. Then the big one dropped. According to storm chasers, before approaching Greensburg, this tornado was well over a half-mile wide and only visible during lightning strikes and power flashes. At 9:41 p.m., the National Weather Service in Dodge City would issue a very rare tornado emergency. The situation was becoming dire. A large and destructive tornado was inching close to a city of 1,500 people. Conventional wisdom of meteorologists and storm chasers would have given some small hope that the tornado might miss most of Greensburg just to the southeast, sparing much of the town and threatening mostly open country and sparse population. But Greensburg would not be so lucky. The tornado began to occlude just before reaching town. This is the time not long before a tornado's lifespan is near its end. The tornado begins to move more erratically, pulling more to the west. While doing this, the tornado's size increased to over 1.7 miles wide, and its winds increased to EF5 intensity. It did so immediately over Greensburg, a town only 1.5 miles wide.
Effectively, the tornado was bigger than the town. On May 4th, 2007, 95% of the town of Greensburg was left uninhabitable. The other 5% heavily damaged.
The full destruction wouldn't be totally clear until the following day, but overnight emergency responders were already beginning to understand what had just happened. Total annihilation. In spite of all the injuries, 11 fatalities, and 95% of structures completely destroyed, including the schools, the hospital, government buildings, and all infrastructure. Greensburg was able to recover, for the most part.
The rest of Greensburg is a miracle. All of the commercial and government buildings are LEED Platinum certified. Effectively, the town of Greensburg is now green.
Today, Greensburg is now widely considered the greenest town in America. All city and county government buildings, the hospital, a business incubator, and more are all LEED Platinum certified, meaning their energy efficiency and sources are among the best possible. Even some homes were built with innovative green and tornado-resistant construction techniques like ICF. Greensburg is an example that becoming a ghost town on the plains due to utter annihilation from a tornado is not a foregone conclusion. Better construction techniques, improved warning systems, local economic investment, and just pride in a city can all contribute to the survival of a rural plains town. Greensburg had a lot more going for it before the other ghost towns that I've mentioned before this.
Greensburg is the perfect example that a Great Plains town can be completely destroyed by a tornado, but it's not a death sentence for the town. Many factors made Greensburg special and the reason why it bounced back. Greensburg lies along US Highway 54, and it's also a major thoroughfare for railway traffic. It also helped that Greensburg is the county seat of Kiowa County, meaning there was a lot of reasons for government buildings to exist here. In the time immediately after the tornado, people actually wanted to rebuild Greensburg. They cared about it. They lived here. This is where they're from, and this is what they wanted to do. And so they did.
Small towns on the Great Plains definitely have an edge if they can keep a sense of identity and notoriety. Being the home of Laura Ingalls Wilder, or home to a remake of Stonehenge made from cars, are ways small towns can benefit from this sense of self-identity. And one town in particular makes Twisters that identity. On May 9th, 1996, what appeared to be a strong F3 tornado made a direct strike to the town of Wakita, Oklahoma, heavily damaging downtown businesses and homes. And you probably already figured out that didn't actually happen. To film this part of the 1996 blockbuster film Twister, producers selected the sleepy Oklahoma land rush town of Wakita to serve as a practical effects set for the daring rescue of Aunt Meg from her damaged home. Truckloads of debris were brought in and literally dumped onto Main Street, while several real homes were destroyed to give an immersive sense of a disaster scene. But what if a real tornado of this strength actually did hit Wakita in 1996? Would there even be a Wakita today? There's the Twister Museum and the Twister Cafe, but sadly the school closed recently. Wakita is a lot like Codell in Manchester. It isn't near another major metro area, and it's hanging on as best it can. Like Codell, Wakita has tornado notoriety for its self-identity. Still, many homes are empty and dilapidated. The lots of homes purchased by the producers of Twister were never rebuilt. 25 years later, they remain memorials to what they once were, and the important role they played impacting modern American culture.
Welcome to Picher, Oklahoma, or well, what used to be. I'm standing in somebody's former kitchen. That's not actually a natural phenomenon behind me. That's something called chat. Basically the leftovers of lead ore after it has been ground down and the lead was extracted. These piles are toxic. They contain so much lead and cadmium and other nasty chemicals like arsenic that they poison the water here.
Picher, Oklahoma deserves its own long-form documentary, and there are many to be found. I'll link to a few of my favorites in the description of this video. The short version works like this. Picher and its adjacent towns were built on land essentially stolen from a Native American reservation after the discovery of lead and zinc just underground. Picher sprung up right on top of the lead mining operation. At its peak in 1926, over 14,000 people called Picher home. The tailings from the mines were left in giant piles all around the city. A lot of piles, easily visible in satellite photos. The lead mined here helped the Allied powers win 2 world wars. Naiveness about the danger of the piles had combined with the undermining of the town itself. Both problems went unchecked for decades. Mining operations ceased entirely in the 1960s, and the population of the area rapidly decreased. Children started getting sick, and the land was found to be structurally dangerous. An ecological and human tragedy unfolded. After several years of attempted cleanup, the problems were finally recognized to be too dangerous to anyone living in Picher, and cleanup would have to be incredibly extensive.
Residents were forced to move out, and it left this area a major environmental disaster.
The federal government condemned the entire town in 2006. But in May of 2008, around 1,500 people were still living in Picher, waiting for their buyouts to be processed, or digging in and insisting on keeping their homes.
But before everybody was able to move out of Picher, Oklahoma, another terrible tragedy occurred.
And then the tornado hit. On May 10, 2008, a significant tornado outbreak impacted areas of the Deep South. But it all started in the extreme southeast corner of Kansas, with a growing supercell producing tornadoes along a path that followed the Oklahoma border. Picher would soon find itself in the crosshairs of a violent tornado.
On May 10, 2008, Picher, Oklahoma was devastated by an EF5 tornado. What few residents remained had no longer any reason to stay.
Damage was extensive. 20 of Picher's city blocks were reduced to rubble. While Picher was already deemed to be a danger to live in, very few homes remained after the tornado. The buyouts were quickly processed, and all but a tiny number of residents remained. But they would soon leave as well. Picher today is a post-apocalyptic scene of damaged buildings, empty streets and lots, framed by mountains of toxic chat. Of each of the towns that I visited on the plains for this project, Picher and the surrounding communities are the most interesting and impactful. Tens of thousands of people lived in this area at one time, but now it's just uninhabitable nightmare fuel.
Picher, Oklahoma today is a Superfund site. The Kapwa Native Americans now currently administer this land. Someday it may be used for farming again. In order to get there, an extreme amount of cleanup needs to be done. Some of these chat piles have already been sifted through and cleaned, removing any lead, zinc, arsenic, and cadmium that remained in the rock. Some of this remaining chat will be interred underground and returned to the mine shafts from which this rock was extracted.
Many other towns on the plains are in danger of not bouncing back after a powerful tornado. Why a town becomes a traditional or disaster-related ghost town goes beyond just the science and into the economics and philosophy. What we can do is learn from these examples and think about solutions for the future, whether that's improving existing construction, more economic investment, or radical ideas like a shift in our agriculture system, away from strictly commodity crops and CAFOs towards smaller farms and homesteads that would rely on community systems rather than logistics. Maybe it's a little bit of all of these things. The possible solutions are as many as the problems these small towns face. If you find yourself visiting the Great Plains, take a moment to really see the challenges that face America's breadbasket. Use the local inns, check out the landmarks, buy your gas and snacks far from the expressways, visit the diners and dives and meet the friendly faces. You'll be glad you did. Just give a little extra attention to the weather if you come in the spring. If you have some ideas on how to help the Great Plains avoid or bounce back from disaster, let's discuss it in the comments. There are a few more tornado ghost towns out there, and if you know of one, let me know. I may come back to this topic in the future. Thank you for watching, and I want to give a shout out to the over 800 subscribers who have found me over the years. You've been great, and I'm going to keep dialing things up as I go. I've got many more projects coming that I hope you'll enjoy. And if you thought this series was pretty cool, share it with your friends. Hit the like button. Any and all engagement helps this channel grow. Until the next one, get outside and learn something new.